Bueno, entonces ahora que todos estamos listos, listas, le dejo la palabra al profesor Mauro Jarquín, quien es miembro del comité editorial de la revista Intercambio y nos va a ser el moderador de hoy.
Hola, hola, ¿me escuchan? Ok.
Sí.
Pues bienvenidas y bienvenidos a la presentación de este número de la revista Intercambio, eh, dedicado, como bien saben, al estudio de las derechas en la región. Un número con el cual esperamos aportar elementos significativos, tanto a la construcción de un análisis sistemático respecto a las nuevas expresiones reaccionarias que están operando no solamente
reactionary
incluso en
rights
América
that
Latina,
are
sino a nivel
operating
global, pero
not just
también
in
intentamos construir determinadas rutas de organización política frente a este escenario. Este número que tuvo la participación de muchas personas y muchos trabajos muy, muy interesantes. El día de hoy va a ser presentado por tres compañeros que integran la red y que además han participado activamente en el desarrollo de un debate muy denso y políticamente relevante sobre la resistencia a las derechas y a las extremas derechas en la región. El día de hoy nos acompañarán Steve Stewart, quien es el coordinador de la Red Social por la Educación Pública en América Latina. Nos acompaña también la doctora María de la Luz Arriaga, que es profesora de la Facultad de Economía de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México y es coordinadora de la sección mexicana de la Coalición Trinacional en Defensa de la Educación Pública. Bienvenida, maestra, bienvenido, compañero profesor Steve. Nos acompaña también el profesor Edgarich López, quien es docente de la Universidad Central del Ecuador, es exministro de Ambiente del Ecuador e integrante también de la red de investigación educativa de la Red SEPA. Entonces, el día de hoy, compañeras y compañeros que participan, nos van no únicamente, digamos, a hablar sobre el trabajo que hicieron, el desarrollo que construyeron, sino en general sobre la importancia de la discusión de estos temas en el contexto político actual en América Latina. Cuando escribimos este número, no teníamos digamos, frente a nosotros digamos, punto de visibilidad reaccionario también en Colombia. Cuando escribimos este documento, no había todavía o no de manera tan evidente como cada día lo es más, un proyecto de reapropiación política de la región por parte del proyecto imperial estadounidense y por parte de determinados sectores locales reaccionarios. Entonces, este texto, digamos que nos puede permitir también encontrar ciertas claves de lectura a un fenómeno que aparentemente, bueno, no aparentemente, que evidentemente es cada vez más complicado y más difícil de gestionar, sobre todo para las izquierdas en su diversidad. Entonces, para dar paso a la presentación del número, escucharemos primero al compañero Steve Stewart, quien nos va a hablar sobre el trabajo de resistencias a la nueva derecha en educación pública en los Estados Unidos. Entonces, por favor, compañero maestro Steve, ¿te encuentras por allá?
Um, Thank you.
The floor is yours, please. 15
Thank
minutes.
you. Thank you. I will be
Thank you.
presenting in English.
Sí, muchísimas
Yeah.
gracias. Yo voy a presentar en inglés.
And yes, thank you for this space. Um, First, I just want to begin with a caveat that Maura already touched on, that
Mencionando
the articles, many
la
of the articles in the last issue of Intercambio were drawn from a larger research project that the Idea Network has carried out at the continental level, looking at the impact of the new rights in public education. And so the article that I am speaking about in this presentation is drawn from a larger piece of research I did for that study, looking at the impact of the new right in public education in both the US and Canada. We were hoping to be publishing a book based on that research in in the fall of this year. Also, the caveat that this article in Intercambio was submitted almost exactly a year ago. And in the United States in particular, although all over the continent, a huge amount related to the new right in education has happened since that article was submitted and that our issue of Intercambio was published. And while I have tried to follow fairly closely the resistance taking place in the United States to the attack by the new right on public education and the school community, I haven't done another sort of comprehensive research into it. So I suspect there are many people listening that will be aware of events that I may miss in that portion of it, and I welcome you to raise them when we move to the part of questions and observations. The third point I wanted to point out is that this article is focused primarily on K-12 education. The new right, particularly since the arrival of Donald Trump to national office in his second term, has had a tremendous impact on post-secondary education in the United States. But the limited space that was available for the article didn't allow me to also explore that. It's definitely worthy of an article on its own. And finally, I want to acknowledge the important contribution of the 2024 book, Activists, Advocates, and Agitators, 21st Century Justice-Oriented Teacher Activist Organizations, that was edited by Idea Education Research Network member Brianna Kramer from the University of Utah. I found this book particularly useful in the research I was doing into the sort of rise of new forms of teacher activism in the United States. In the article, I argue two central points. One, that there is a qualitative difference between the policies of neoliberals in public education and those of the new right. And the second is that the rise of social unionism among U.S. education workers in the decade prior to the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, as well as their experience confronting the new right at the local and state levels, put U.S. educators in a much better position to defend the public education community since the new right assumed power at the national level with the arrival of Donald Trump's second administration. For those who are not from the U.S. or not that familiar with it, the United States has one of the most decentralized public school systems, or public school networks, I guess you could call them, in the world. You have your independent jurisdictions of 50 states, but within that, you have municipal and even sub-municipal levels of school systems. And so, for example, San Antonio, Texas, has a very active teachers union. The city of about 1.6 million people has 17 separate school administration school districts. And this atomization of public school systems has enabled the new right and other sectors to experiment and test the appeal of their policies or their demands for decades, enabling them to develop strategies, tactics, and policies that are later promoted at the state and national levels, and then exported abroad by far-right think tanks and political networks, so that they end up appearing as policies all over the Americas and in other parts of the world. Well, keeping in mind the vast diversity that exists within the hundreds of public school jurisdictions in the U.S., education policy in the U.S. can kind of be loosely divided into those of the red states, traditionally governed by Republican Party, and blue states, those governed by the Democrats. Between and within the 50 states, of course, there are differences in intensity, but in general terms, the blue states, defenders of public education confront a more classic neoliberal education policies, while in the red states, they're facing the policies of the new right under the MAGA Republicans. And the policies of the new right don't supersede neoliberal policies, but they have a number of additional packages. And if I'm able to share, yes, it looks like I am. I'm just going to quickly share a table that I put together that kind of tries to sort of identify some of the additional policies. So in neoliberal education policies, we see such things, and we're all familiar with them because we've been suffering them for decades in all of our countries. Cuts to the education budgets, a kind of accountability that's based on sort of mathematics or numbers, a managerial model of school administration rather than a collegial model, a heavy use of standardized exams to be able to measure things, promotion of charter and private schools, monetization of the curricula, the purchase of them from large corporations, as well as encouragement to market curricula, and a focus on education for what industry needs rather than what society might need. So for new right education policies, we would include all of those, but you would also see greater restrictions on freedom of association, a strong anti-union bias, which you also have in neoliberalism, but not as vigorous or as successful as in jurisdictions controlled by the new right. The erosion of professional autonomy, reintroduction of religion into schools in the United States in the form of fundamentalist Christianity, impoverishment of the curriculum, reducing it to its most basic courses, such as literacy and mathematics. You will find some of that in neoliberalism because they don't want to be spending money on frills, but there's an active desire to get rid of courses that sort of produce a more rounded person within the new rights policies. Banning of a wide range of books from school shelves, a strong focus on anti-LGBTQ plus measures, whether that's protective measures or inclusion in teaching, a strong promotion of parental authority or parents' rights, calling for the absolute authority of the parent over their children's education, rather than admitting a sort of social value, general social value to education. Hostility to any form of diversity, equity, and inclusion measures, the banning of ethnic studies, any form of critical education, and the teaching of any history that doesn't have a focus on white, particularly males of European descent. A promotion of education vouchers to subsidize private and religious schools by enabling parents to transfer their share of. Now, Alex, maybe you can tell Mauro to introduce Edgar,
Edgar, ok.
and I'll do the interpretation.
Bueno, entonces,
And
siguiendo
so,
con la
following
programación
with the
del día de hoy,
programming of the day
a
of
continuación nos
today,
acompaña
in
el
continuation,
profesor
we are
Edgar
accompanied by
Edgar Ish,
Professor
que es
Edgar Ish,
maestro en la
who
Universidad
is
Central
professor at the Central
del
University
Ecuador, y él nos
of
va a
Ecuador,
compartir
and he's going to share with
su
us
trabajo
his
para
work
este número de la revista
for this
Intercambio.
issue of
Igualmente,
Intercambio
maestro
magazine.
Ish, 15
Also,
minutos de intervención. No sé si te encuentras por ahí.
teacher Ish, you have 15 minutes for.
Muchas gracias, pues por favor, te escuchamos.
Thank you.
Gracias, Mauro. Muy gustoso de estar aquí. Saludos cordiales a todos los compañeros, compañeras que mantienen, como la mayoría de docentes del continente, creo yo, una amplia preocupación de lo que está ocurriendo.
Concerned about what's going
Hace un
on.
momento hacía
Steve.
referencia a que estamos trabajando un libro que creo yo que está muy cerca de salir, que profundiza precisamente el estudio sobre las nuevas derechas. Hay algo que allí se dice que me parece que es importante remarcarlo el día de hoy. No todas las derechas son iguales, así como no lo que sucede en cada país latinoamericano es replicable a otro. existe una diversidad importante que va desde derechas más tradicionales, más oligárquicas, pasando por derechas extremas y llegando en algunos casos, no en todos, incluso a políticas de corte fascista. ¿Qué es lo que tienen en común? ¿Qué es lo que de alguna manera les ha caracterizado? Me voy a permitir compartir con ustedes una presentación precisamente en el propósito de ir midiendo aquellos impactos que van demostrando. Una idea previa. La educación es un acto político. Esto nos lo dice Paulo Freire, nos lo dicen una serie de autores. ¿Por qué lo es en líneas generales para quien no lo maneje? Lo es porque cuando hablamos de educación, lo primero que estamos pensando es en qué sociedad
When we
queremos, qué
think
tipo
of
de
education, it's
When we talk about
answering the
education,
question
we
of
talk about what
kind of
type of
society
society
do
do
we
we
want?
want.
And
When
when
we
we
talk
know
about
which
what
kind of
type of
society we
society,
want,
tipo de
is when we
educación
know
es
which
necesaria
kind
para
of
esa
education
sociedad.
is needed
Y
for
ahí
that
vamos
kind
a
of
ver
society.
incluso los detalles.
And there we're going to
¿Qué
see
tipo de
the
docentes
details. What kind of
necesitamos? ¿Qué tipo de
teachers, what
estudiantes
kind of
vamos a
students
trabajar y qué
are we
tipo de
going to work
metodologías
with?
y de temáticas se van a
And
considerar? Para la derecha está muy claro, o las
be
derechas,
clear with the
es
rights, plural.
sustentar una sociedad
They argue for a society that is strongly conservative
partes
in the areas
conceptuales, en las partes ideológicas,
conceptual and ideological
innovadora en
parts,
la parte
and
tecnológica,
innovative in the
pero ante todo,
technological side,
discriminadora en
but
todos los
above
niveles,
all,
que la
discriminatory
cual se pueda
at all
seguir
levels.
fomentando
And
aquello
how
del
can they
1% de la
continue
población
promoting
mundial
that
que tiene una
1% of the
riqueza
world
superior
population
a la mitad
um,
de personas del mundo.
it,
Claro que en ese sentido la
earns more
educación
than
es un acto
half the
político, no
entire
estamos
population of the
hablando de una
world?
política partidaria,
So we're not
estamos
speaking about a
que también
political
es
party
necesaria
policy,
seguramente y
but
es
it's surely necessary.
absolutamente un
Um,
derecho. Pero estamos haciendo
um,
referencia
but
también
we're making
al hecho de
reference
que
to
estamos juzgando ese tipo de
that we're
sociedad.
judging this
Para la
kind of
derecha eso es
society
claro.
for their right.
La educación
It's
no es
clear
neutral,
education
es
is
el
not
campo de
neutral.
batalla por
It's
el
a
futuro social.
battlefield for
La
the future of
educación, la
society.
emancipación es una
Education
posibilidad,
for
pero la otra
emancipation is
posibilidad,
a possibility,
sin duda,
but the other
determina la
population, of
educación
course,
que se
is an
encamine
education
a la
that moves
dominación, al
towards
mantenimiento
domination
de las
and
desigualdades,
the
o no solo mantenimiento,
strengthening of
sino
inequalities,
reforzamiento de
um,
aquellas
and
desigualdades.
for the reinforcement of the
Entonces, son dos caminos.
inequalities.
Cada
And so
quien
they've
tiene
got
que
two
tomar
routes.
posición frente a esto. La
Each,
red SEPA, por
everyone
supuesto,
needs to
está
take a
del lado de
position
la
towards that.
educación para la
Idea
liberación,
Network, of course, is in
pero hay
favor of
quienes
education for
están del otro
liberation.
lado. Y son
But there
equivocadas
are
las posiciones de
others
derecha en aulas
who have the
y
position
las posiciones de
in the
derecha a la
classroom
escuela desde
um,
cualquier
that
nivel
any
educativo, desde
level
la escuela
of
primaria,
education from
la escuela
primary
media o la escuela superior.
to high
La
school
misma
to
escuela puede
post-secondary
constituirse
school,
un
the
medio
same
de
school
reproducción de la
can be
dominación,
a means of reproduction of the
dominación
means of
y
existing
por lo tanto,
domination. And so,
en medio de esta
in the
discusión,
midst of
la
this,
derecha se lanza a trabajar en
the
aquello que han
right
denominado una
has
guerra
launched,
cultural.
they have
Guerra
launched what they
cultural,
call the cultural
porque no
war.
se trata
And it's fundamentally,
forzosamente de
it's not
utilizar las armas de destrucción
necessarily
masiva,
talking about using weapons
pero
of
sí
mass
se trata de
destruction,
usar las
but yes,
armas
it's
de
about
destrucción
using
masiva del
the arms
pensamiento crítico,
of
las
massive
armas de
destruction of
destrucción
critical
masiva de las
thinking
capacidades
that
mentales superiores de los seres
change
humanos,
the
como son
mental
aquellas de poder
capacities of human
relacionarse,
beings
como
around
son aquellas de poder
analyzing
planificar,
information,
de
those
poder
that be able to plan,
contextualizar,
to put in
etcétera.
context,
Esta guerra
etc.
cultural
This cultural
busca
war
intervenir y dominar la
looks
sociedad
to
a
intervene and
partir de
dominate the
medios de
culture
comunicación, redes
through means
sociales,
of
las noticias
communication,
falsas,
social
ciertas
network,
corrientes religiosas
certain
reaccionarias que ante
religious
todo son
currents,
sectas
reactionary religious
nacionalistas
currents,
históricas,
not the traditional
buscar
churches, but more
desinformación
fundamentalist
para
sects,
crear un
um,
sentido
to try and create unquestionable common sense by a common sense achieved through repeating over and over again that if education is bad, it's the teacher's fault. If that inclusive education should not be considered a right, that education should not be free, that this should be this cultural war privileges emotional responses rather than rational analysis. It tries to drive people away from critical thinking. And they have done this historically over and over again to such a manner that we achieve the single thought, or as Saramago would call it, zero thought, because we don't have to think. We just have to repeat what we get from Hollywood. We just have to repeat what influencers tell us, and through economic gaps express. And so single thought, it eliminates all form of criticism or interpretation that is distinct. To create this common sense can take those, including to bring the oppressed to defend the ideas of the dominant classes. If the oppressed become the butlers for the dominant classes in bringing forward their ideas, to such a way that in the millions, people who do not locate themselves where they are, including if you ask them what social class they're in, and the salary doesn't even give them enough to cover their basic needs, they'll say they're middle class.
In the school-based indoctrination, there are different phases. There's educational standardization. In that way, the curriculum is focused very much on standardized evaluations. And then that is prioritized even above the contents that they try to share through the curriculum. Higher than the curriculum, higher than the context, there's a focus on standardization of what needs to be learned, and the teacher has to be submitted to a certain idea, a certain pressure, thinking, how do I make it based on my experience? How do I make it so that the students this year can pass this exam? So they're not focused on them learning the contents. They're not focused on the curriculum. They're just trying to make sure that the kids pass. And then that turns out to be an evaluation of the teachers as well as the students. There are prizes and punishments that are used almost like sticks and carrots for the teachers. And somebody could say, well, things have changed because of technology. But for example, Bloom, which is a famous classification system, it has been adapted for this, to say that human capacity and ability can be divided and evaluated separately, piece by piece. And we can't consider the whole entire brain and the whole entire workings of the brain. So it's a type of pseudoscience which is based on a new science, which is a very newfangled science, neuroscience, saying that men think with the left hemisphere and women think with the right hemisphere, for example, or to consider that that we have to take into account the truth that we're all working with our whole brain, and that when we're working, that if we were working with our whole brains, all of us, maybe we wouldn't have the same divisions based on machismo and assign women to the sphere of feelings. So there's something affecting our capacities, our ability to concentrate, and that's shown through all the different mechanisms of screens, that information is being simplified to a great extent. And I'm bringing in artificial intelligence here. And, it's as if every topic can be covered in 2 or 3 points, almost as if it was a tweet. But it means that very few people have the capacity to understand deeply what's going on. So all of that weakens our critical thinking. There's also different kinds of knowledge, positions, topics, which they've sought to eliminate, for example, philosophy in certain universities and in certain countries. In other countries, they reduce the time that people spend learning about history, thereby canceling possibilities of getting deeper into that topic. Also, there's attacks on scientific advances on gender studies, which has nothing to do with supposedly a gender ideology. It's really only the most reactionary elements who talk about this gender ideology. But it is important to talk about differences between men and women and how those are used in order to deepen a system of injustice. So we talk about this mechanism of injustice based on gender, different mechanism of injustice based on ethnicity, another based on class. And because of all that, we have inequality. So that's what they don't want us to discuss. They don't want us to discuss rights. They don't want us to talk about their clumsy attacks on our rights. They don't want us to talk about climate change, or better said, climate crisis. Because when we talk about climate crisis, we have to talk about what are the causes of this climate crisis. And that means that we have to bring into discussion the development model that capitalism imposes on us right now, and which puts humanity in an extremely dangerous position of denial. The denial of education as a right is something that's also being reproduced. Saying that it's not a right is a step that will help them also cancel other rights, for example, health and others. So if education, health are not considered rights, then that will have an effect on equality, inclusion. It will weaken public education, and it will reduce the state's responsibility to its people, because when we have a state, when we have a right, the state has to be the one to guarantee the implementation of that right. So we could find that education gets divided up and weakened. So once again, I'd like to say the crisis in education is not an accident. It's a consequence of something that has been coldly planned out by the dominant classes. When education is weakened amongst the popular classes, it will be easier to control them and to manage them. And so therefore, they use different instruments to say that they should have an education that is like an ideologically based. They say, they have to say a technical education, but technical is not divided or not separate from political. So if they say that they're going to try to defend children from strange ideas, then those are any ideas that challenge power, especially in the dominant right wing. When they talk about banning topics, books, activities, and we're not talking about the Middle Ages, we're talking about nowadays. If I'm not wrong, in the US, there's around 4,000 books that are being banned in different districts, school districts. In our case, in Latin America, there's similar things happening. And they say to us, oh, well, in social science, we do study the Cuban Revolution. But yeah, they say they give us like 5 points, almost as if they're a tweet, and nobody is able to interpret different ideological visions. And then the last point I want to make about like technical education and the avoiding of strange ideas, so-called strange ideas, it's as if education were neutral. But in fact, it's an ideological space, a dispute space for everything we're talking about. So we're talking about a pragmatic, dehumanized education. All of that is in the right wing's interest. The different social groups end up on the edges, marginalized. But something also that we should mention is STEM, that we would have an education that's only based in science, in technology, and math, and engineering, as the only useful knowledge is a complement to all that we previously discussed. So in this way, we've changed from being citizens to consumers. And instead of people who have ideas, we are believers. And we end up being people who are aspiring for riches thanks to entrepreneurial visions. So what do we do in this situation in education? Understand that there's a political dispute at every single level, academic, about the contents of educational curricula, practices, teaching practices. Schools need to be places where we see rights in practice. We don't just talk about them. Where children have sufficient protection, not where they live and fear the same risks that they have to face outside the school. We have to strengthen our collective path together in order to strengthen the autonomy in classrooms. When the first universities were created, they were feudal universities. Of course, they were universities to strengthen feudalism. But the level of autonomy that exists in educational institutions made them put out, nonetheless, thinkers who, of course, thought about revolution in their time. The same thing could happen here. Critical pedagogy has to allow us to create new relationships, strengthen our relationships between teachers, students, colleagues, and communities. The right is doing everything possible so that everyone becomes like vigilant and looks how to attack teachers and talk about the prioritized rights of children and adolescents. So how can we become organic intellectuals tied to popular sections of society? This has to do with the struggle in favor of public education, democracy, human rights in general. We need to strengthen scientific thinking in dialogue with the conversations with indigenous and ancestral communities. Take into account human diversity as a strength that we have to defend. Popular humanism protect children's happiness, helping them to acquire different characteristics like respect and responsibilities, but also giving children the opportunity to feel happy. And I'm about to finish up. Everyone has to occupy their spot and defend their spot. So thank you so much. I'm going to leave it there for the moment. And I think afterwards we'll have the opportunity to hear all of you and to answer your questions or deepen on any of the topics that we've discussed up till now. Thank you so much.
Bueno, hola. Muchas gracias.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Teacher Edgar.
exposición y creo
Mauro,
que muy
This
disculpe.
is very
Mauro,
interesting.
parece que la intérprete
Mauro,
regresó,
it seems like the
entonces,
interpreter is back.
puede dar un pausa por un momento
So could you
para
just give a moment so that people could,
sacarme de la cabina y
so that Alex can
claro, sí,
kick
sí,
me
sí.
out of the cabin and put Martha in?
está activa
Oh,
la
it's good. We're good to go. We have the interpretation working now.
bien, ok.
Oh, super. Okay.
Sí, entonces continuamos.
Okay, so let's move on.
Bueno.
Sí.
Ok,
Yes.
gracias, Steve.
Okay,
para
thanks, Steve.
cerrar con la presentación.
So
El día
in
de
order
hoy,
to finish up with our
la
presentations
doctora
today,
María de la Luz
we're going to
Arriaga
hear from
Lemos de
Dr.
la
Maria
Universidad
de la
Nacional Autónoma
Luz
de México.
Arriaga Lemos, who
Se
is from
encuentra
the
por acá.
Autonomous University
Doctora.
of Mexico. She's here. Go ahead, Doctor. Maro, but just really quick, I want to let Steve finish his
¿Quiere que
presentation.
terminemos ahorita o lo dejamos al final?
Should we do it now or should we let him
¿Qué
finish at
prefieren?
the very
Steve,
end?
¿quieres
What do you all
ahorita
prefer?
continuar?
Prefiero
Steve.
al final para poder colectar
Prefer to
mis
do it at the end
pensamientos, porque
to allow myself to collect
acabo
my
de pasar
thoughts
por un periodo de
because
interpretación.
I just had to interpret.
Ok.
Oh, okay,
Entonces,
no
por
worries.
favor, y ya
Please go
después,
ahead, Doctor.
Gracias.
Bueno,
Thanks, Steve.
primero, pues gracias por estar aquí presentes en este webinario. Es un esfuerzo muy importante. Creo que, y me da mucho gusto que haya compañeros y compañeras desde Canadá hasta el sur de América Latina. No voy a mencionar a todos los que han estado colocando sus nombres y sus procedencias. Me da mucho gusto. Y como ya dijeron Steve, Mauro y Edgar, esto es parte de un trabajo que empezamos a desarrollar hace 2 años de reflexión sobre las nuevas derechas en educación. Ya está el libro, espero que sea muy rápidamente ya disponible para todos y todas. Y bueno, a mí me corresponde hablar sobre la experiencia de un caso de estudio que es El Salvador. Voy a colocar unas diapositivas, si me dan oportunidad. Oh, no están. ¿Qué pasa? Ah, sí, aquí está. Sí, ya las ven, ¿verdad? Y bueno, antes que nada, quiero mencionar que esta presentación la propusimos para una compañera, Elsa, que está en El Salvador, pero que no podía presentarse con todos y todas porque hay una condición de mucha represión en El Salvador. Ahorita vamos a hablar de eso. Entonces, esta aportación es de Elsa desde lo que diría nuestro gran poeta Roque Dalton, el pulgarcito de América. Y aquí quiero hacer una muy breve introducción. Creo que de las ideas que virtieron los 2 compañeros que me antecedieron, una debe ser muy clara. Lo que estamos viviendo y lo que entendemos como el actuar, como los valores, como la ideología de la nueva derecha es muy distinto de lo que vivíamos con la derecha, digamos, tradicional en nuestros países, en nuestras sociedades. La derecha tradicional prácticamente fue desplazada y ha quedado subsumida dentro de la extrema derecha, dentro de las nuevas derechas, y tienen un elemento muy importante, están articuladas. Si ustedes ven la actuación de cualquiera de las expresiones de las nuevas derechas en el mundo, todas tienen referentes internacionales y alianzas internacionales. Esto es muy importante porque, en contraste a eso, en la clase obrera, en los trabajadores, las trabajadoras, no tenemos esa articulación. Y esto nos convierte en una clase obrera con debilidad. Necesitamos fortalecernos. ¿Cuáles son los rasgos de esa nueva derecha? No voy a repetir todo lo que dijo Edgar, solamente me gustaría enfatizar. Son autoritarios, xenófobos, hacen xenofobia, son discriminadores, militaristas, racistas, y están apoyados, en este momento es muchísimo más claro, creo que cuando empezamos el estudio no era tan claro, pero están apoyados por las grandes empresas que dominan hoy el mundo, que son las empresas productoras de las tecnologías informáticas y particularmente de la llamada inteligencia artificial. Hace muchos años ya, con Larry Quinn, que está entre nosotros, que me da mucho gusto, discutíamos en la coalición trinacional cuál era la perspectiva de esta irrupción de las nuevas tecnologías informáticas. Y un texto que fue muy importante era mostrar cómo estas tecnologías modelaban el cerebro. Y hoy es muchísimo más claro lo que enfrentamos. ¿Por qué toco este tema? Porque, como seguramente después se los vamos a compartir, hay ya publicaciones, como la de Mauro Jarquín sobre pedagogía ludita, donde se muestra que las corporaciones de la inteligencia artificial tienen una triple fuerza motriz, como le llama Roberto Leger. Uno es la ingeniería de la subordinación real del trabajo al capital para fosilizar las distinciones jerárquicas de la fuerza de trabajo. La segunda es la industria militar. Hoy todos somos testigos, todas somos testigos de que la guerra se hace de otra manera. Ahora son con drones, teniendo identificados a las personas que van transitando en la calle y que son directamente acribilladas desde o a partir de ese uso de estas tecnologías. Y el tercero es la difusión de un sentido común congruente con la fascistización de las sociedades. Nuevas derechas, nuevo imperialismo y nuevo fascismo son una parte, son una articulación que existe. Bueno, dicho esto, quiero comentarles lo que pasa en El Salvador. Y aquí empezaré diciendo algunas de las ideas que trabajamos Elsa y yo. ¿Por qué la fama de Nayib Bukele? Por su retórica de triunfos de sus políticas de mano dura para combatir a las pandillas. Esto acompañado de la construcción de una megacárcel donde los presos no tienen derecho alguno. ¿Por qué tiene fama Nayib Bukele? Por su entreguismo ante el gobierno de Estados Unidos. En marzo del 2025, recordemos que ofreció al gobierno de Trump el uso de la megacárcel que construyó, es el centro de confinamiento del terrorismo, hasta en el nombre lleva que es el vínculo ideológico que tiene con el gobierno de Trump, el gobierno de Nayib Bukele. Lo ofreció para recibir a los migrantes o presos de Estados Unidos que ese gobierno consideraba peligrosos, esto a cambio de un pago por cada uno de los individuos que recibiera. O sea, iban a darle o le van a dar o le dan una cuota ya por esto. ¿Cómo gobierna Nayib Bukele? Pues aquí también entra lo que ha sido una transformación radical en nuestro mundo actual. El uso de las redes sociales. Esto ha sido importantísimo para la manipulación. Esto lo usa para imponer un sentido común dominante acorde con los principios y valores de la ultraderecha. ¿Cómo gobierna? Con la militarización. Hay un régimen de excepción renovado cada 30 días. El país, El Salvador, vive en estado de excepción y se ha constituido este régimen de excepción en una herramienta voraz para el control y criminalización de las voces disidentes en contra de las nefastas políticas y violación de los derechos humanos de las poblaciones. También ejerce, por supuesto, un autoritarismo y ha militarizado a las escuelas. Designó como ministra de Educación a la capitana de la Fuerza Armada, Carla Edith Trigueros, el 14 de agosto del 25. Esto es una expresión práctica y simbólica del papel e incidencia militar en todo el acontecer y escenarios de la educación pública, encubierto por la necesidad de velar por el orden y la disciplina en los centros educativos. En los centros escolares se vive una atmósfera de terror frente a la amenaza constante a jóvenes, a la niñez, de enviarles a ser disciplinados por la Policía Nacional Militar. Lo que sigue es un testimonio, un fragmento de un testimonio de docentes que dirigieron a los padres y madres de familia. Les dicen, vinieron funcionarios del Ministerio de Educación y llamaron la atención al director y personal docente por encontrar estudiantes que no cumplen con el corte de cabello francés. Yo tuve que ir a buscar qué significaba eso del corte francés, ahorita les digo. Y otras normas impuestas para los uniformes de niñas y niños. Por supuesto, están prohibidas las minifaldas para las jovencitas. Si no acatan la orden, vendrán nuevamente y los enviarán a hacer un programa de disciplina con la policía hasta que su hijo o hija se discipline. Les decía que tuve que investigar qué era eso del corte francés. Y lo que dice la inteligencia artificial, por supuesto, es que en la barbería clásica y escolar se refiere a un estilo masculino tradicional y pulido, caracterizado por laterales cortos y bien definidos. Esto es como si fuera un corte militar, lo que les exigen a los jovencitos de las escuelas de El Salvador. La maestra Elsa mandó un memorándum que yo quería presentárselos, pero no pude presentar, no se ve, entonces se los voy a leer. Este es un memorándum de el Ministerio de Educación, Ciencia y Tecnología, dirigido a los directores de escuelas del sistema público. Y dice, esto fue el 18 de agosto del 2025. El asunto son medidas disciplinarias para el ingreso de estudiantes a sus respectivos centros educativos. Y dice así: en el marco del fortalecimiento de la disciplina, el orden y la presentación personal de la comunidad estudiantil, se establecen los siguientes lineamientos de estricto cumplimiento. 1. Los directores y directoras de cada centro escolar son los primeros responsables de dar cumplimiento a estas disposiciones, asumiendo su rol como modelos de orden y disciplina para estudiantes, docentes y personal administrativo. Tienen que estar a partir del 20 de agosto en los portones de ingreso y tienen que vigilar o supervisar los siguientes aspectos: uniforme limpio y ordenado, corte de cabello adecuado y presentación personal correcta, ingreso en orden con saludo respetuoso. Si no hacen esto, dice así: la omisión de estas disposiciones por parte de los directores será considerada una falta grave de responsabilidad administrativa y dará lugar a las acciones correspondientes. Esto es a lo que la compañera Elsa se refiere cuando dice que es un elemento que aterroriza a los estudiantes. ¿Qué otros elementos están en el trayecto de lo que están viviendo en El Salvador? Bueno, hay una asfixia presupuestal, despidos arbitrarios y persecución de docentes críticos. Lo que nos dice la compañera es que hay retrasos en los desembolsos porque hay en ocasiones en las que falta hasta el 50% del presupuesto. Hay endeudamiento con los proveedores, suspensión de proyectos de investigación, en especial de naturaleza sociocultural, becas, en fin. Un ejemplo concreto es la Universidad de El Salvador. En la cobertura estudiantil, esto ha disminuido. El outsourcing, hay contrataciones de servicios privados, etc. Los compañeros y las compañeras han estado viviendo despidos de manera arbitraria bajo la figura de supresión de plazas. Hay persecución política de los profesores, de los trabajadores y trabajadoras de la educación, les arrebatan sus derechos y hay persecución particularmente a los defensores y defensoras de derechos humanos. Hay cambios curriculares que tienen que ver con lo que ya planteó Edgar. Hay un detrimento de lo que son las materias o los contenidos de carácter histórico, filosófico, social, y se avanza más en las carreras técnicas, contrariamente a las humanistas. En síntesis, en la educación pública se vive una constante incertidumbre, hay temor, en forma directa o indirecta se violenta la libertad de cátedra, hay un atentado a la dignidad docente y estudiantil, la libertad de las comunidades educativas están coartadas y están buscando que cada centro educativo sea un semillero para consolidar pensamiento y acción, formas de pensar y sentir y actuar dentro de la lógica que nutre toda la maquinaria política, económica, cultural, estructural, que garantiza la cohesión de un sistema político cada vez más derechista, fascista y dictatorial. ¿Qué están haciendo las comunidades educativas en El Salvador? Están haciendo lo que se está haciendo en muchas poblaciones y muchas comunidades de El Salvador. Resisten en condiciones difíciles. Las educadoras y los educadores, los estudiantes, las estudiantas, los defensores de derechos humanos, defensores del agua, del medio ambiente sano, de respeto a la naturaleza, nos dice Elsa, mantenemos acciones defensivas con muchas dificultades para actuar abiertamente. Muchas veces son acciones semiclandestinas y nuestra única protección es el actuar colectivo, vinculados con las comunidades, pero la situación es muy difícil. Gracias por la solidaridad internacional y la oportunidad de expresarnos en este webinario. Elsa, agosto del 2026. Es todo.
Muchas gracias, maestra. Es muy interesante, muy interesante y duro también lo que comparte la maestra Elsa. Gracias, creo que esto es un ejemplo muy claro de hacia dónde está caminando en general en estas tendencias reaccionarias en la región. Gracias, maestra Mariluz, y saludos a la maestra Elsa hasta El Salvador. Por favor, Steve, si quieres cerrar tu participación.
Thank you. So you need to activate your Spanish listening again.
Entonces hay que
I'm not sure exactly where in my presentation the interpretation fell down, but I'm going to sort of take it from when I just finished presenting the chart about the kind of differences between neoliberal policies in education and the policies of the new right, and move on to discussing the argument around the development of new forms of resistance among teacher organizations in the decade prior to the pandemic. What we find is that resistance to neoliberal education policies in the blue states and also in those Republican states that were not yet MAGA or New Right, and resistance to the policies of the MAGA New Right in the red states, arises primarily from tendencies of organized educators who have built alliances with parents in marginalized areas, with community, anti-racist, and immigrants' rights organizations, as well as with other public sector workers. In some places, these kind of rebellious teacher tendencies that advocate social unionism have gained leadership over local structures in the two major national teachers organizations, the National Educators Association and the American Federation of Teachers. In others, where there's larger barriers to unionization and union organizing, this resistance continued, but in different forms, through informal networks of teachers who organize virtually. But even in those states where the new right, in the shape of the Make America Great Again Republicans, dominate state and municipal government structures, these teacher mobilizations managed to resist far-right policies and in a number of cases won improvements in teaching and learning conditions. Perhaps the strongest example of this, which had a profound influence on organizing in other regions, is the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, or CORE, in Chicago, Illinois, the third largest city in the United States. The rank and file educators of the Chicago Teachers Organization Union created CORE because they are unhappy with the existing leadership's lack of resistance to neoliberal policies in their city. And they organized it as a tendency within the union, and by 2010 had won the leadership of the teachers union of 28,000 members. Soon after that, the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, a prominent Democrat, began a series of neoliberal policies programs within Chicago that led to the shutting down of many schools, granting of schools, public schools over to charter organizations, increasing of standardized testing, cutting services, reducing options for art, physical education, and theater. The CTU during that time developed alliances with parents and students in the schools threatened with closure, and began to strengthen its alliances with other teachers unions in that sector. In 2012, this CTU launched its first strike in 25 years, but It was a different sort of strike because in addition to the traditional demands for better wages and benefits, the union added demands for better learning conditions for its students. They called for a reduction in standardized tests, a halt to school closures and privatization, a reduction in student-teacher ratios, and the restoration of music, sports, and art programs in marginalized neighborhoods. These demands, which became known as for the common good, inspired strong support for the strike among teachers and with support workers whose union also joined the strike. This strike, while not gaining everything they demanded, won significant advances for the students and families and teachers in Chicago. And this successful experience inspired teachers in other states to also build teacher community alliances and to invite representatives of CORE to come and speak to their own assemblies. This spawned such new union trends as the movement of rank-and-file educators in New York, the Caucus of Working Educators in Philadelphia, Baltimore movement of rank-and-file educators, and many other new teachers movements or tendencies within teacher unions. In 2013, these different tendencies organized a national conference, which led to the creation of the United Caucuses of Rank-and-File Educators, a national alliance to promote mutual aid between education workers groups. Initially, as I mentioned earlier, these tendencies emerged primarily in the blue states, which had a strong tradition of union organizing among educators. But even within the red states, particularly in the South and Southwest of the United States, where unionization levels are low, and in some cases it's forbidden for unions to negotiate collective contracts, new forms of community-linked teacher organizing took place that led to a series of spontaneous walkouts in 2018 that became known as the Red State Rising or Red for Ed campaign. As these strikes spread throughout the South and Southwest, the more and more teachers got involved until close to 400,000 teachers were involved in 2018 in these actions. And following the same example of Chicago's CORE, the teachers groups in the Red for Ed movement added demands to strengthen public education and improve learning conditions. These strikes then spread back into the North in 2019 with massive mobilizations in a number of large northern cities. But with the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2019, much of the mobilizations came to an abrupt halt as teachers struggled to adapt to school closures, online teaching, and sanitary measures. So while the teachers were forced to focus on addressing their students' needs during the COVID crisis, the new right saw this as a new organizing opportunity, manipulating parents' frustration with school closures and some of the new sanitary measures as tools, using them as tools to expand their basis of support. So it was during that period where the sort of rise of the expansion of social unionism's actions were stopped, that the new right was able to really gain a foothold throughout the country. But the organizing that took place during that time put teachers' organizations in a much stronger position to resist when in January 2025 the new right assumed power at the national level with the election of Donald Trump to a second term, this time completely dominated by MAGA Republicans. And so following that, teachers' organizations were able to play a key role in organizing resistance to the policies of the Trump administration. At the national level, the two main teachers' federations, American Federation of Teachers and the National Educators Association, engaged in legal struggle, launching court cases to try and stop the total dismantling of the Department of Education. But at the school district level, teachers throughout the country organized to keep the Trump's newly revitalized immigration agents, known as ICE, out of their schools and protect the families bringing their teachers to school. Some groups, such as the UTLA-affiliated Alianza of Raza educators, formed patrols to follow ICE as they left their bases and alert school communities of their movements and whereabouts. And during the heavily militarized ICE occupation of the cities last year, of the cities of, and this year actually, of Los Angeles, Chicago, and Minneapolis, the teachers' unions in those cities played a significant role in coordinating resistance to the heavily, that eventually forced the withdrawal of the bulk of ICE agents from these cities. As well, the social union teachers organizations have been key in organizing these unprecedented mobilizations, broader mobilizations in the United States, such as the No Kings rallies, Labor Day and May Day mobilizations that have called for an overall end to the MAGA rule. So that's sort of a quick synopsis. As I said, there's so much more to examine in the past year since our issue came out. But the key thing is the scaffolding on which was built, the rise of social unionism among teachers' organizations and new forms of organization in areas where unions have been prohibited from operating has enabled teachers to play a key role in resisting the assault on public education and on the public school communities. Thank you.